From a young age, we learn that putting others first is a virtue. We hear that being a good person means always being available, helping without question, offering our time and energy without expecting anything in return. But at some point, without realizing it, we start believing that taking care of ourselves is selfish, that prioritizing our own needs makes us less generous or less deserving of love. And that's where the problem begins. Carl Jung used to say that within each of us exists a hidden universe, a world that can only be accessed when we allow ourselves to look inward. Yet, we live in a time where we are constantly encouraged to seek outside of ourselves for answers that can only be found within. Social media, work, relationships, and all kinds of distractions pull us away from what truly matters, our own essence. And the more we ignore who we are and what we truly feel, the more disconnected we become from our true identity. This manifests in emotions we can't explain, repetitive patterns in our relationships, and that persistent feeling of dissatisfaction, as if we are always waiting for something to finally make us feel complete. Have you ever felt trapped in a routine that doesn't fulfill you? Have you ever wondered why, even when you do everything right, you still feel empty? The truth is, disconnection from ourselves doesn't happen all at once. It accumulates little by little through the small compromises we make every day. We say yes when we wanted to say no. We maintain draining relationships out of fear of loneliness. We ignore our intuition because it seems safer to follow what others expect of us. Jung taught us that the unconscious doesn't communicate with words but with signs. And every time we ignore these signs, we drift further away from our own essence. Perhaps you have felt an invisible weight at the end of the day, an emotional exhaustion that has no clear explanation. That exhaustion comes from carrying what isn't yours, from molding yourself to fit into places where you don't belong. And the worst part? Most of the time, we don't even realize that we are living to meet external expectations. Over time, we become mere reflections of the world's demands, while our true identity gets lost somewhere along the way. But there is a way back, and that path begins with a simple yet powerful decision: prioritizing yourself. This doesn't mean ignoring others or living in isolation. It means recognizing that, before anything else, you need to be well with yourself. Prioritizing yourself is not an act of selfishness, but of responsibility. When you put yourself first, you are not pushing people away. You are learning to relate to them more authentically, without carrying the burden of being someone you are not. But for that, you need courage. The courage to stop and look within, to question old patterns, to face those parts of yourself that you may have avoided for so long. And that is where the real journey begins. Because prioritizing yourself is not just about making small daily decisions, but about transforming the way you see yourself and the world around you. This brings us to something essential: the need to face what we have been avoiding within ourselves. The biggest resistance to prioritizing yourself doesn't come from others. It comes from within. There is a part of you that has learned over time that it is safer to mold yourself to external expectations than to face the uncertainty of following your own path. Jung called this the shadow, everything we repress because it doesn't fit the image we have created of ourselves. But what happens when we ignore this hidden part? It doesn't disappear. On the contrary, it manifests itself in subtle ways, in the frustration we feel for no apparent reason, in the destructive patterns we repeat, in the difficulty of setting healthy boundaries. Perhaps you have noticed this in your own life, that cycle of relationships that always end the same way, the exhaustion you feel after interacting with certain people, the feeling that no matter how much effort you put in, something always seems to be missing. These signs are not random. They are messages from your unconscious, trying to show you that there is something within you that needs to be acknowledged. But instead of listening, we often choose to run away. We keep ourselves busy, seek distractions, convince ourselves that everything is fine. Until one day, the weight becomes too heavy to ignore. Prioritizing yourself means having the courage to face this shadow, to recognize that some of the pain we carry was not imposed by others, but perpetuated by ourselves when we chose to ignore what we truly feel. Jung said that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. In other words, What we avoid within us will always find a way to manifest in the external world. So if you feel like your life is stuck in a repetitive cycle, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what within me is being ignored? But facing yourself is not comfortable. It requires you to look at your insecurities, at the fears you have avoided for so long. You may discover that you have spent years accepting less than you deserve, that your choices were guided by the fear of disappointing others, that deep down, you don't believe you are worthy of the love and happiness you desire. And that realization can be painful, but it is also liberating. Because from the moment you acknowledge these truths, you have the power to transform them. This is the point where many people give up, because change means letting go of what keeps us trapped. And sometimes, that means leaving behind relationships, habits, and even dreams that are no longer aligned with who we truly are. But this loss is not the end, it is a rebirth. When you allow yourself to let go of what doesn't belong to you, you create space for something new to grow, something more true, more aligned with your essence. And this is exactly where many people face their biggest challenge, dealing with the guilt of choosing themselves, the fear of seeming selfish, the worry about what others will think. But does this guilt really come from a genuine place? Or is it just a reflection of a society that teaches us that loving ourselves is a mistake? The guilt of prioritizing yourself is a weight many people carry without realizing it. From an early age, we are conditioned to believe that our existence should revolve around others, meeting expectations, being useful, not disappointing. And when we finally decide to change this dynamic, that inner voice emerges, telling us that we are wrong, that we are being selfish. But does prioritizing yourself really mean harming others? Or is this guilt merely a reflection of years spent living to please? Jung believed that self-love is not a superficial concept, but the foundation for any real transformation. We can only truly connect with others when we are whole, when we are not seeking in them a validation we cannot give ourselves. But society has taught us the opposite. It has made us believe that loving ourselves is an act of arrogance when, in reality, it is an act of responsibility. Because when you constantly put yourself second, expecting the world to give you what you deny yourself, you end up creating a trap, the frustration of never feeling truly seen, heard, or valued. Perhaps you have experienced this feeling, giving yourself to someone, hoping they will reciprocate in the same way, sacrificing yourself for a relationship, a job, a friendship, believing that if you do everything right, you will finally feel complete. But the truth is, that completeness will never come from the outside. And the more we try to find it in others, the further we drift from ourselves. Because we are placing the key to our happiness in the hands of someone who can never hold it for us. And here lies the crucial point. When you learn to prioritize yourself, you are not rejecting the world. You are freeing yourself from the need to be accepted at any cost. This doesn't mean you will stop caring about others. On the contrary, it means that your relationships will become more authentic because they will no longer be based on the need for approval or the fear of rejection. You will start setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, recognizing that your time and energy are valuable. And when you do this, something unexpected happens. The people around you start seeing you differently. Some will respect you more. Others will distance themselves because they can no longer manipulate you in the same way. But in the end, those who remain are the ones who truly connect with you for who you are, not for what they can take from you. This process of change can be lonely at first. When you decide to prioritize yourself, you inevitably challenge the dynamics that kept certain relationships and patterns intact. Some people may not understand. They may call you insensitive, cold, or say that you changed. And the truth is, you have changed. But not because you became a worse person, rather because you are finally living according to your truth. Jung said that authenticity is the only path to emotional balance, and being authentic often means leaving behind what no longer represents you. But this transition is not always easy. There are moments of doubt, moments when you question whether you are doing the right thing, the fear of losing people, of displeasing, of not being understood. But what is more painful? Losing someone who never truly accepted you, or continuing to lose yourself every day just to be accepted. This is the choice that defines the entire journey of emotional healing. And when we understand this, we begin to realize something essential. The world around us is nothing more than a reflection of our internal state. If the world around us reflects our internal state, then all true change begins from the inside out. Jung believed that what we carry in the unconscious directly influences how we experience life. In other words, when we are disconnected from ourselves, we attract situations that reinforce this disconnection. We engage in draining relationships, accept less than we deserve, and feel like we are always fighting against something invisible. But when we make the decision to prioritize ourselves, something powerful happens. Our energy shifts, and with it, the reality around us begins to transform. Perhaps you have noticed this in your own life. When you start setting boundaries, certain people who once seemed indispensable begin to drift away. The job that once consumed you no longer makes much sense. The routines that once felt tolerable now feel unbearable. This is not a coincidence. When you change internally, your vibration also changes, and everything that is not aligned with this new version of you naturally starts to dissolve. It is an uncomfortable process because the unknown is frightening, but it is also liberating because it means you are finally making space for something new to enter. Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, moments when, by following our truth, the universe seems to respond. Opportunities appear out of nowhere. People enter our lives at the right moment. The answers that once seemed unattainable begin to reveal themselves. But this synchronicity does not happen by chance. It is a reflection of the alignment between who we are and the path we are choosing to follow. The more we listen to our intuition, the more we find open doors where we once saw only walls. But to reach this point, we must face fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of failing, the fear of regret. Because prioritizing yourself means letting go of the illusion of control, trusting the flow of life, and accepting that not everything will follow the script we imagined. Often the need to please others stems from the fear of losing something or someone. But the truth is, nothing that is truly yours can ever be lost. What falls away when you prioritize yourself are merely illusions. The relationships that only existed because you ignored your own needs, the commitments that only made sense because you were afraid to say no, the dynamics that persisted because you sacrificed your authenticity. And this is exactly the point where many people give up. Because when you start to change, the world around you tests you. Some people resist your transformation. Some situations try to pull you back into old patterns. And you ask yourself, is it worth it? Am I really on the right path? But this doubt is part of the process, because true change does not happen linearly. Sometimes we take one step forward and 2 steps back. Sometimes we feel lost. But Jung reminds us that confusion is also part of transformation. It is in moments of uncertainty that we are closest to great evolution. And if you resist the temptation to go back, if you have the courage to move forward, something incredible happens. You begin to feel lighter. The weight you carried without realizing it starts to disappear. Your energy shifts. Your perception of life changes. And for the first time, you feel that you are exactly where you are meant to be. Staying firm in the decision to prioritize yourself is the real test. At first, the choice to put yourself first may seem clear, even liberating. But as time passes, challenges arise. People question your change. Old situations try to pull you back. Your own mind begins to sabotage your progress, bringing back old doubts. Am I overreacting? Am I being selfish? And without realizing it, you might start giving in. Small returns to old patterns, concessions disguised as understanding, that just this once that suddenly turns into a habit. Jung spoke about the inner critic, that voice inside us that repeats all the insecurities we have accumulated throughout our lives. It is shaped by past experiences, by the opinions of others, by fears we absorb without noticing. And when we start to change, this inner critic becomes louder, trying to convince us that we are not capable, that we are wrong, that we will never be able to maintain this new stance. This is why many people give up before seeing the full transformation, because they believe more in fear than in their own intuition. But here's the crucial point. The way you treat yourself defines everything. If your inner voice is based on judgment and self-criticism, Your journey will be a constant battle against yourself. But if you start treating yourself with compassion, if you learn to see your mistakes not as failures but as part of the process, then something inside you begins to change. You start trusting your decisions more. You begin to realize that you don't need to justify your choice to prioritize yourself to anyone. You start accepting that some people will call you selfish, and that's okay because it says more about them than about you. And this is when true transformation happens. When you realize that the only validation that truly matters is your own. When you understand that saying no is not an act of rejection, but of self-respect. When you discover that being alone doesn't mean being lost, but rather being in a space where you can finally hear yourself. And then, everything starts to realign. Relationships that weren't based on authenticity naturally begin to dissolve. Situations that once felt oppressive lose their grip. You realize that the things that once felt like sacrifices now flow more easily. What once seemed difficult now becomes your new reality. But this transformation only happens when you resist the temptation to return to what is familiar, when you choose again and again to honor yourself above all else. And in the end, this choice doesn't just affect you, because when you change, the world around you changes too. The transformation that happens when you choose to prioritize yourself is not just internal. Gradually, you start to notice that everything around you adjusts as well. The relationships that once demanded so much from you begin to dissolve, not because you rejected them, but simply because there is no longer space for what is not aligned with who you truly are. And at the same time, new connections emerge. People who understand you, who respect your boundaries, who are not bothered by the fact that you now know what you want. Jung said that the external world reflects our internal state, and this becomes evident when, by changing how you relate to yourself, you attract experiences that once seemed impossible. Situations that once held you back now lose their power. The fear of judgment no longer paralyzes you as before. The need for approval starts to fade. And for the first time, you experience something rare, the peace of being exactly who you are, without having to shape yourself to fit anyone's expectations. But this process does not mean that your life will be perfect, or that you will never face challenges again. The difference is that now you face them from a different place. You no longer accept just anything. You no longer force yourself to stay where you don't feel good. You no longer seek happiness in others, but within yourself. And that changes everything. At first, some people may not understand this change. Some will try to bring you back to the old pattern because it is more comfortable for them if you continue being who you always were. But you are no longer that person. And that's okay. Because prioritizing yourself doesn't mean excluding others. It means that you have finally learned that, in order to truly give, you need to be whole. And then, what once felt like a struggle transforms into a natural flow. Your choices are no longer driven by fear, but guided by intuition. You stop insisting on what doesn't make sense and start following what truly makes you feel good. Not because someone told you this was the right path, but because now you feel that this is your path. Jung taught us that the true purpose of life is not to avoid suffering, but to find meaning in it. And by prioritizing yourself, you discover that every challenge, every loss, every transformation was, in fact, an invitation to become who you were always meant to be. The process of emotional healing is not about erasing the past, but about learning to carry your story lightly without letting it define your future. So now that you understand what it means to prioritize yourself, the question remains, are you ready to choose yourself? Not just today, but every day. Because this choice doesn't happen just once. It needs to be reaffirmed at every moment. Life is waiting. The world is waiting. But before anything else, you are waiting. And the only person who can take that first step is you.